Thank you all so much for being here. We're so excited tonight to have Judy Bales presenting Concurrent, Stories of Fashion, Art, and Technology. This presentation is in conjunction with the exhibition All Dressed Up and Down, Depictions of Clothing in the Collection, which is on view now until May 18th. That exhibition considers how clothing is depicted through works in our collection and what those depictions can tell us about the subject of the work, the artist, and the culture that surrounds them. During the exhibition, we also thought it would be nice to consider the art of fashion, hence tonight's presentation. And also, at the end of the month, and let me pull up the flyer and share that. Okay, hopefully you all can see that. Hide this, okay. Hopefully you're able to see the poster there. But at the end of the month, on Friday, April 25th, we'll be hosting the Art in Motion fashion show. Judy will be one of the designers featured during the show, along with Gian Shrewsbury and Kathleen Shrewsbury. This fashion show is an exciting first for us, and the runway will actually be in the galleries. So you'll literally be surrounded by art, both on the walls and moving right in front of your eyes. Tickets are still available for the fashion show, and to purchase or just for more information, please reach out to our education director. Her information is there on the flyer, but her information can also be found on our website as well. So do check it out. Tonight presents a great opportunity to hear more from Judy before the fashion show and get a sense of the designers that are most relevant and top of mind for her right now. Before I turn it over to her, I wanted to give you just a little more information on Judy. Building on over 30 years of experience in diverse artistic endeavors, including fiber artist, fashion artist, and public art design team member, Judy Bales creates art that is the improbable marriage of cold industrial materials and the sensuous qualities of nature. She utilizes industrial materials, many of which are found, recycled, or salvaged in an ongoing effort to reveal beauty in unlikely places. Bales, who received both her BFA and MFA degrees from the University of Georgia, majored in painting as an undergraduate, and completed her postgraduate work in fiber art. While closer to a fiber artist in her choice of materials, she approaches her art more like an abstract painter, relying on improvisation and painterly techniques rather than the more precise, controlled approach traditionally favored by fiber artists. Bales continually exhibits her work and has shown in over 80 groups and solo exhibitions throughout the US, as well as in Canada and New Zealand. So thank you so much for doing this tonight for us, Judy. We're so excited to hear more for you. And I am going to share the PowerPoint right now.
And can everyone hear me okay? Is my volume good? I assume
you sound good to me.
Okay, great. Okay, it was such a pleasure for me to be able to put together this presentation because I love fashion so much and I absorb so many images. I'm constantly looking for images of designers and fashion from all over the world. And so it was very hard to pick out a few designers to condense into this little presentation, and I chose 5. And they're all people who combine, they go far beyond fashion, and it overlaps with art, science, technology, with, every discipline, really. So the next slide will show the first designer that I'll talk about, who is Alexander McQueen. And I'm starting with him because he's arguably probably the most influential designer in the latter part of the last century and the first part of this century. He kind of came into my awareness about 2011. And tragically, he had already in 2010 taken his own life at the age of 40. Just a huge loss, of course, to everyone who loved him, but to the fashion world, to the art world. he grew up in a working class family in London and was able though to just he had a love of fashion, a love of construction. He was able to work himself into major couture houses, lines, and then to go back to school, get his master's, and then launch his own line eventually, and became, again, one of the most influential designers in the world. And this little opening for him shows just a little selection of his work. And the next slide shows the opening of Savage Beauty, which was a retrospective at the Metropolitan Museum of Art. And I actually discovered him in Prairie Lights Bookstore in Iowa City. I found a book on him, was just blown away. I started researching him, and I discovered that there was either right then or coming up, there was this huge exhibition at the Metropolitan. I never travel spontaneously, but I said to my husband, we absolutely have to go see that show. So we did. And this was part of the entry into the show. There's always there's this exquisite beauty with his work, but there's often, I won't say always, but often this kind of underlying darkness and danger. And for example, these two very, very beautiful dresses on the left, the top, the bodice, is glass micro slides like you would use in a microscope. And then, of course, the red implies blood or can imply blood. So there's this combination of beauty and a little darkness or a little danger. And then on the right, this gorgeous white, it could be a wedding dress, but it's constructed from uh, razor clams, so they're very clam shells, so they're very, very hard and very sharp. So again, just such beauty, and yet one does really wonder, how it would affect the body if you were wearing it. And then the next slide, this was the first room I walked into in this exhibition, and it was sort of a life-changing experience. And it was just gallery after gallery within the museum of collections of different bodies of work of his. And this was this very Gothic, Victorian, romantic, uh, this entire collection, and they were almost all Black, if I remember. There was this faint music that the museum had created. It was very, very effective, and it was sort of eerie. So it was just this, again, this Savage Beauty is such a perfect name for this exhibition and describing his work and the extensive craftsmanship. He originally he had the ability to do everything in terms of construction, but of course, later he was able to have many, many assistants that created the works for him. But that's all feathers on the right, that dress, and they're stitched in. And then the next slide shows this collection was called The Girl Who Lived in a Tree. And he often drew on historical references, and especially the kind of mystery of the mental state of tragic women throughout history, such as Joan of Arc, Catherine the Great, Marie Antoinette. He was fascinated by history. And well, he was really fascinated by everything. He was described once as being a sponge. He just absorbed so many influences. And none of these are specifically about a specific person in history. So they're not pinpointed like that, but they're his creation about his imaginations about those people. And in the next view, I believe this may have been part of that particular collection, but I'm not sure. This is all gold painted feathers, then sewn onto the garment, and then the dress is silk, white silk with gold thread embroidery. So again, um, many people creating these once he was at that point where other people were creating his designs. So hugely labor intensive. And then next we'll see these are two, these were not part of the same collection. On the left is, it's a kind of printing on fabric that he experimented with, printing of photographic images from paintings. But the really interesting thing to that, with that piece, of course, to me, is that perceptual confusion that you have. It's as if you're looking at a jacket that doesn't have a back and you're seeing a tattoo, or you're seeing you feel like you're seeing the body of the model, but it is in fact a photographic image, and then you feel like there's just two different layers. So very fascinating the way he would play with space like that. And then on the right, this garment is it's a type of gazelle that lives in Africa, and he describes it as it's small, I believe, and it has beautiful eyes and this velvety coat, and yet it's a very important part of the food chain. And it was kind of his comment on the impermanence of life. And then he was very theatrical. The next slide shows this model is Amy Mullins, and she's a para-athlete, a para-Olympic athlete, and she is a double amputee. And he created these, and a model, obviously, and he created these wooden, designed these wooden prosthetic legs for her. And she opened a couple of runway shows for him in these legs. She only received the legs 7 hours before the first time she wore them. And he had them created by a prosthetic and expert, and then given to a wood carver and gilder. And so you see the actual legs in process in the middle, and then on the right. I saw a video of her, and she had a funny story about this really gruff coach that she had that really pushed her. And he said gruffly, Amy, if you're running and your legs fall off, just pick them up and keep going. And that is clearly kind of how she lived her life. She's still living, and very active. And so I think McQueen loved collaborating with really in unusual situations, as you'll see in the next slide. So this model is started with, she's wearing a white dress, and she's on this kind of turntable, sort of like a lazy Susan that you see under her. And these two just these big robotic creatures that you can see in the next slide come from different sides, and they start just spraying paint. And it sort of has this, air of violence to it, but she's obviously quite game. And it's interesting to me how much they look like the marks they're making, the kind of the black tubing or pipe. However, it took quite a while. I think it took a couple of weeks for them to actually program these robots to do what they wanted them to do. But again, it shows how much he wanted to push all of the boundaries and experiment, and he loved collaborating with people who were willing to do those really interesting things as well. And then the next slide, these are various examples of headdresses. He once commented that often fashion appropriates cultural designs that are really, in a way, kind of insulting to that culture if they're directly appropriated and not really honoring that culture. He absorbed everything, but at the same time, he just filtered it through his through his own sensibilities, his own consciousness, his own experiences. And what came out was just was something that was totally him and totally unique, and yet with these influences. And it really shows us how there's a distinction between influence and appropriation in design or in art. We all are influenced because we see things all the time, especially with the internet. We're constantly seeing things. But we create, hopefully, we create something that's still totally still our own and is unique. And then this, I cannot remember the name of this collection, but very dramatic and very unified. I love the way this his runway shows more and more became like performance art. And this, it's as if these models have become one organism. There's so much variety in what they're wearing, and yet they're all just perfectly unified in this collection. And a lot of feathers. He was very fascinated by birds from early in life, and that shows up in many of his collections. And then I think I have a final slide on him. Yes, this was the last gallery that we got, that as you exit the Savage Beauty exhibition, and I just wanted to read this quote from him. It was called Atlantis, and he said it's predicting a future where the ice caps would melt, the waters rise, life would have to evolve to live under the sea once more or perish. And this is the really beautiful quote. I thought, there's no way back for me now. I am going to take you on journeys you've never dreamed were possible. And he really did. I think he just opened up so many eyes of artists, of fashion designers. He opened up the general public in realizing that fashion is absolutely art. There's no, there's no distinction about what creative objects or acts are art. It's how it's done, and he was such a gift to the world. So the next artist that I'm going to talk about is Iris van Herpen. She is Dutch. She interned with Alexander McQueen, I think, for a year in about 2004. She was trained as a classical ballet dancer, and she really thinks, she kind of looks at the world in terms of movement and fluidity, and that shows in all of her works. She has really embraced technology. She was one of the first, let's see, we can go ahead to the next slide, I think. Yeah. She was one of the early artists to use 3D printing as a major component of her fashion designs, and laser printing. And oh, she's worked with electricity, with magnetism, with just really scientists all over the world. And so she collaborates, and she must have just an incredibly brilliant and just curious mind, and constantly overlapping and depicting. She's very rooted in nature, and yet she's using this highest technology, on the cutting edge of whatever technology is available, and the cutting edge of science to create these garments. And I don't believe I could even, I think uh, to read about how each one was constructed would be a whole thesis in itself. So we just have to kind of guess. But these on the two outer sides are very much like land forms to me, or water forms, or different waves. The next slide shows, this is more like sound waves. She is interested in the visualization of sound, of or other aspects of science, like I believe the word is synapse. It's communication of neurons within the body. I'm not saying that very well, but she incorporates much about biology, but always within the human form, or always combined with the human form. And then the next slide is, this grouping is my favorite, and I'm guessing that those are all 3D printed. She did many works that are, yeah, many works that were based on the skeleton, and they're related to biomimicry in that they're clearly uh, evocative of something that's real in of a real skeleton, or something real in nature, and yet they're not exactly. So it's a mimicking of that process or that kind of structure. And you see that especially on the one on the right, which is very, very skeletal. That middle picture is the photograph, the piece, and the photograph, I just think, is so beautiful. And the whole area of photographing fashion is yet another just wonderful area of art creation. And I do think that that photograph is just absolutely beautiful as an artwork in itself, as a photograph. Um, and the purity of the white, or the off-white, lets you really see the form without being just, I shouldn't say distracted, but without being also caught up in looking at the color. So the next slide. These also are from this very watery or sound wave. So many different possibilities of what the one on the right makes me think of the Doppler effect, if you know that effect in sound. And again, a simplicity here, a simplicity of the color of the pattern, and that really makes the allows you to really see what that pattern is that she's created. I believe I have one more slide of her. Yeah, and these again are the middle one is very much like seaweed or plant forms, or skeletal forms, as is the one on the left. So they kind of combine, and that's one thing that's always so fascinating to me, is when there's so many when an artwork, especially in fashion, there's so many things that it could reference, but you can't quite put your finger on exactly what it is. And it just keeps you coming back and looking more and more and delving deeper and deeper into those pieces. And and then this is just a final slide of her work. On the right, this is very bird-like, very feathery, as is the middle. And then the waves of the left. It's hard not to, for me, it was hard not for me to keep putting images, because I kept just finding all these beautiful, beautiful images from these designers. But again, that middle photograph to me is just a gorgeous photograph, and also shows how museums create uh, a whole installation when they display fashion. And every major museum in the world, I know at this point, has put on a blockbuster fashion exhibition. In fact, the one at the Metropolitan of Alexander McQueen was one of the 10 most visited exhibitions in their history, and they opened in, I think, 1841, I don't know, sometime in the late 1800s. So it was up there with King Tut and Mona Lisa, and they're really, it just shows the hunger, really, and of the public for this combination of artistic beauty and the human form in something that can actually be worn or walked in. Okay, and the next designer is, I had to figure out how to pronounce this. I believe it's Yao He. She is China's leading designer. She started sewing at age 2, and she delves into, let's see, we can go to the next slide and I'll start showing you some of her just absolutely jaw-dropping work. She depicts her culture's history in the way that fairy tales and legends have in paintings and embroidery, but she does it through the medium of fashion. And they're they're not kind of, they're truly mind-blowing. And I have not seen very many runway shows of her work, but it's pretty hard to imagine how the models walk in them. I love the way, just a funny thing I noticed in the slide on the right is there's a man in the audience that is kind of shielding his eyes, and I'm sure it's because the lights on the other side of the runway are shining in his eyes, but it made me think he's just dazzled by this amazing dress. And I kind of loved seeing that little view. So the next slide shows yeah, these can take up to 2 years. She now has about 500 skilled assistants that help her in doing the embroidery and the all the construction. And they must be quite heavy, especially the ones that are very encrusted with beads, or, well, the embroidery can be quite heavy too. Let's see, the next slide is, yeah, this line, or this is part of a line that it 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 really references her cultural history, but she'll bring in military history, or, as I said, fairy tales. They're all different aspects of her culture. And uh, and it's so interesting in this collection of this body of work where, again, they're so unified, but the shapes are so different. The patterning, the materials, the color is unified, but it just, all these um, different expressions of whatever theme she's working on that are so different, and yet they come together and are such a beautifully um, connected body of work. I believe the next slide has more of the embroidery. Nope, okay, sorry. Couldn't remember what order I had these in. Here's another photo that I think is really, really interesting, because we've got this amazing workmanship and design on the model, this dress. And it's taken from nature. I mean, these are floral patterns, but it's very, very regular and very precise, and clearly very, very thought out. Every single stitch, every single bead, every single piece of embroidery, you know that she has designated exactly what that is, where that's going to be. And yet she's there in between these two very rough hewn pieces of wood or a building, and it all somehow just comes together as this beautifully unified whole, as if these two things, this very rough aspect of, I mean, nature isn't random, but there is at all, but there is a kind of a looseness, a kind of bordering on chaos that nature can take on. And this garment is so completely ordered. and yet the two just seem married to each other. Okay, the next slide. And this is showing how, again, how fashion is being displayed in contemporary museums. And these just beautiful open open gallery areas with these kind of jewels of these garments, and really given, I think that fashion is now given by museums the honor that it, that it, as art pieces, that it deserves. And the piece on the right, the blue piece, is that references the ceramic history of Chinese ceramic history. So she pulls in, very influences of very different materials into her fabrics. And I think the next one, somewhere I've got some details. Okay, this is just one of my favorites, just because it's just such an exquisite piece. I just, as I look at these, I just get so excited, and I never tire of, with all of these designers, I always go back to them again and again. And I think that that's a sign of a really, really great piece of art. Sometimes a piece of art can really just knock you out, but then, it's like, that's amazing. But then once you've seen it, you've kind of seen it and you don't go back. But all of these designers that I'm showing you, I can go back again and again and always get something new out of it. And then the next slide really is the details. Yeah, I wanted to show you details of a few of these. The one on the left, of course, is the piece I showed you 2 slides back. And you can just see the incrustation of these glass beads. And it's kind of interesting to me because if you look on the right, I was just noticing as I was looking at this earlier today, there is a little bit of these kind of twisty wire things that seems a little out of character. It's like a little bit of kind of just random wrapping of wire, and they're part of that piece. But again, they absolutely work perfectly. But it was somehow a little surprising to me to see those. It seemed a little bit unusual, and I loved that. Might be one more of her. Let's see. Yeah, these almost look like they're inspired by the 1950s, those cute little dresses, that were really popular then. And uh, but she also, of course, they're not all these heavy, heavy, massive things. Those are the pieces that I'm especially attracted to. But she also does these very lighter and much more, they would be much easier to wear. And with all the designers, their runway shows are, of course, far over the top and not really practical. And then as those designs filter into the market, then they become more, it's kind of like the runway is the showpiece. And then they start being made so that they actually can be consumed by the public. Okay, and oh, one more. See, I couldn't stop. These again, just to show you how beautifully and different options that museums use for displaying fashion, sometimes dispersed throughout the gallery, and sometimes what I think is the most powerful is like on the right, when you have this kind of corridor of these beautiful, beautiful, beautiful designs. Okay. Yeah, so the next person, and the next two that I have, I don't have quite as many slides, so just so you know, I won't keep talking forever. This is Rei Kawakubo. She is Japanese. There are several Japanese designers from maybe the last 40 years, I guess, who have been very, very influential Um, she one thing is that she pretty much disregards gender. Her garments are very much uh without references to a particular gender. And for instance, on the right, you see this wonderful kind of, it's not quite baby pink, but definitely a very feminine pink color for this garment. And yet it's almost military in this huge, kind of the hugeness of it and the apparent solidity. It's not solid, but I mean, it looks massive. It looks almost like, you could go into battle with that. And and then on the left, you also have what is pretty much you could imagine this just simply as it is on the wall. It is like a sculpture that is very interesting, but not really related to the body. So she's not, I won't say not related to the body, but it's not defining the body. And we'll see more of that in the next slide. During the 1980s, she did almost completely black, white, and gray. And again, one thing about having one color in a garment is it really emphasizes the form so that you're really zeroing in on what that shape, what that form is. And these are a bit more feminine, at least the two on the right. The left is again not it's not really addressing the body very much. In the next slide. Well, now we have color, but we have the same situation of, especially with far left and the second from the right. Yeah, the second from the right on the right side. These become these large, soft, almost like big soft sculptures. And an interesting thing with these particular Japanese designers, of which she is the one I'm choosing to talk about, is they emphasize parts of the body without that are not erogenous zones. And in the Western history of fashion, there's a lot of exaggeration. We have bustles, we have, huge breasts, we have, or the hips can be really wide or really exaggerated, but they're in the right place. And they're also usually symmetrical. But you'll notice with these large bulges are, for one thing, they're not in a place that you would expect them to be anatomically, and also they're not symmetrical. And that's just a really interesting aspect of the way she approaches this work. And again, very sculptural as an object. And the next slide will show us these are some of my favorites of hers that has to do with are constructed by uh, direct draping on the form, especially on the right. I'm thinking this beautiful collection of these white and off-white garments. There's some slashing, there's some folding that you can tell is very direct and improvisational, and yet absolutely every aspect is thought through, and there's a decision made at every point, and yet they become these just really fascinating layers of the fabric. And the two on the left then they've still got this solidity. And the black one, I love this, openness and the cutting into this sweater kind of form. These are a bit, especially on the left, these are a bit more like an actual garment, but so there is a wide range of her creations. believe that's, yes. Okay, now we'll go to Jun Nakao. He's Brazilian. He is of Japanese descent, though. And this is the final designer I'll talk about, and I'm going to just talk about one really amazing collection that he did in 2004. And in the next slide, you see examples from this. He's a paper maker. He's a multimedia artist, and he works, sorry, not paper maker, but he works in paper. And there was this collection that he created. I think it was over 500 hours and I believe 100 worker or assistants that helped him. It was part laser printed, part embossing, part different ways of folding, different ways of manipulating the paper to create these absolutely just breathtakingly beautiful paper garments and very fragile appearing, very delicate, all white. The next slide shows more of from this line. Sorry, this is just shows the process of creating and fitting them to the models. And he placed them on this black underlayer so that it really, you could see the cutouts and the different aspects of the workmanship on the paper. And then the next slide, I think I've got a couple of slides showing this complete body of work. And then these paper kind of mounds that were on the runway. I love seeing how these designers create the entire environment of the runway with their chosen materials as well as the garments themselves. And then the next, yeah, that's especially this, I love this lace one on yeah, it is like lace. It's paper lace on the on the right, and then how the body the body shows through the shape of the body. So you really see the silhouette of the body as well as in the middle one. And then the next slide is a slightly fuzzy view, but of the runway. And yeah, I think this might be one of my all-time favorite collections, just seeing this. But the next slide shows you the ending of this was very shocking and very dramatic. So as happens with runway shows, each model walks out and then walks back. And then the entire collection, the entire line walks out. And that's what they did. And then they stood there facing the audience. And then on cue, they all ripped the dresses off and tore them to shreds. And like I said, it was very shocking. And I saw a short film of this, and the audience was just, they were crying, they were screaming, and I think I was actually crying. It was just such a strange thing to happen, and just oddly moving. And let's see, I have a quote from him about that, and I wanted to read you that too. I can, yeah. Oops. One moment, I'm there. Yeah, he said, in the end, everything was torn up on the catwalk. We used vegetable paper and turned it into something sublime and fantastic with low and high relief carving, laces and manual cuts, origami, laser cuts. The idea of the project was to show that it does not matter what clothing is made of. People think that everything must be made in high definition. Everything must be made in gold. Everything must be made in brass. Everything must be made in silk, but it doesn't matter. It shows people that their values need to be reanalyzed, that materiality doesn't matter. That is why we destroy everything, to show that there is something more important, something much more lasting than what people see. and value at first sight. And it really made me start thinking about what is permanent, what is valuable about art, and how it's not that physical object that it's created, but it's that creation. It's the fact that it did exist in time, in space at some point, and there's a reverberation of that. There's kind of a cascade of that influence, whether the object object continues or the object does not. And it really, it's a real lesson about our lives as well as about art. And it reminded me, in the next two slides, I'll show you, you're probably familiar with these mandala sand paintings that Buddhist monks do, and maybe other cultures as well. And they're often done in museum settings or art centers as something for the public to come and watch. It takes about 2 weeks for these monks to create these very, very beautiful and precise paintings with sand. And then when it's all done, as you see in the next slide, they ritualistically destroy the entire thing. And I haven't read too much about this, but I feel certain that the whole idea of that is that we have this physical aspect of life, and then it's gone, but that we know that there is something that remains. And yeah, so that's it's a very moving thing. Both of those things, the runway show that I just showed you, and then these traditions are very, very moving to me. And then the ending slide is just saying thank you so much. I hope I've really enjoyed creating and talking about these works, so I hope you have too. And happy to talk if anybody has any comments or questions.
Thank you so much, Judy. That was wonderful. I'm going to stop sharing here so I can allow people to unmute themselves if they have questions. Hang on one second. Okay. Participants, you should be able to unmute if you have any questions for Judy, or feel free to write them in the chat as well.
Thank you, Sean.
I have a question.
There's Wendy.
I don't know why the video, oh, you don't have the camera on yet. I just was wondering, can you hear me?
Yes, we can, or I can hear you, Wendy. Yes.
Okay. When the designers create these outfits that are not wearable, and then you said that then there is a version of them later that comes that might be more wearable. Is that made by the designers themselves, or are they other fashion industry people can then incorporate those designs into wearable garments? How does that happen that
I
they
think
become?
that's I think that's the latter. And actually because I come to my interest in fashion purely artistically, and I
Yeah.
actually don't strive to make a wearable line. Um, so I'm not really knowledgeable about fashion merchandising, but I mean, like Alexander McQueen, there's still his label after he's gone. And there are shops with that's Alexander McQueen. And uh, you do see those garments. I mean, I'm guessing those are probably still very high end, but I'm trying to think of some of the labels all the labels that you see in fashion magazines. If you see the runway show, they're they're hugely dramatic and not something that you can actually imagine wearing either on the street or to a formal gathering. But then there are retail stores that have those. And
Mhm.
so my guess is that, and again, I'm not knowledgeable about the industry, but I think then it filters down to companies that then produce these works under that name.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Thank you.
other questions for Judy?
I don't have a question, but I thought that was a beautiful talk, and I really appreciated you sharing and all of the sort of depth of knowledge that you shared with us. Not only like, you know, more facts, but like your perspective was really cool, and it was fun to hear about it in relation to, thinking about your work um, and influence and all of that. So.
Well, thank
Um,
you, John. And yes, and John is the other John and Kathleen, her mom, other design team that will be showing on the 25th. So yeah.
Yeah, we feel honored. And so yeah, thanks for doing this. It was beautiful.
Thank you. Thank you so much for tuning in.
It was my pleasure. Absolutely. See you soon.
Yeah, thanks. Thanks, Kian.
I also want to say thank you very much. It was lovely, and several designers that I'm not familiar with. And so I'll go back and research some of them and see what other things that they've made. And I hope that this spurs our local museum, Cedar Rapids Museum, to have a few more fashion things. I saw Cat Chow years ago. So I really hope that our museum locally does more of the fashion things that are available. But your talk was wonderful. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. I remember that Cat Chow installation. Julia, that was probably before you were there, and I guess before Sean was
Yeah,
as well. But
Sean was there. Yeah.
oh, okay.
It was one of Sean's projects. Yeah.
Oh, okay. Oh my gosh, that was such a memorable exhibition. And yeah, it was wonderful. Yeah, I hope there is more of that.
And I'll also mention Sean recently did a really nice Zoom presentation about that show and about Kat's work. So that's on our YouTube page as well if you want to kind of revisit that exhibition. That was a great one.
That's great to know. Yeah. And I have since I've been interacting with the museum more, I've kind of tuned in to your YouTube page, and it's really a rich source of just all types of presentations on art from your museum or elsewhere, but
Mhm.
a real variety of talks. And so that's a really rich resource that you have. Yeah.
One of the things that I was noticing as you were going through for some of the artists' work was that combination of technology and forms that are drawn from nature. And that's something that I feel like I see in your work sometimes too, with forms that are pulled from nature, shapes that are pulled from nature, but then using like man-made materials or things that have been produced commercially. Does that kind of comparison ring true for you?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. I think of that a lot, that I'm using man-made or industrial materials, and then kind of it's almost like coming full circle, like reworking them back into something that relates to nature. And there was a really interesting show at another interesting show at the Metropolitan several years ago. It was called Monos Ex Machina. It was Hand and Machine. And it was a huge show, and I got to see it too. And it was, this is not directly related, but it was really interesting how in some cases the machine, it would be, they were garments that combined handwork, or it was both, and many would combine handwork with machine machine techniques or technological techniques. And in some cases, the handwork actually was faster, and the technology or the mechanical techniques were more involved. And I just thought that was fascinating, that kind of just kind of upside down twist of what we think of, that whole inner entanglement handmade, machine made, natural, not natural, it all does get really, really inextricably tangled, I think, in much art today. And yeah, and definitely in my own.
Mhm.
And that iconography is quite fascinating to me because it is, it, I, and I don't study these things scientifically. I just kind of read about them and then I talk about them, and it's not like I'm knowledgeable specifically in those fields, but I think of biomimicry as being creation of forms that relate to the mechanics of something in nature or structures in nature, but they're not. And sometimes that I believe is used in medicine or in technology to create ways of, doing things coming from nature, but it's not specifically something that nature does, but man is doing it in imitation. I'm not speaking that very well, but
No, that was great. Yeah.
it's a really, really fascinating area.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Any other questions for Judy?
I really appreciate everyone
Yeah.
tuning in. It's really
Yeah.
nice and yeah.
And I know that I already mentioned, and you mentioned as well, the fashion show on April 25th. Those that are interested, please contact the museum to purchase your tickets. But I also wanted to ask you, Judy, what else you have coming up? I believe you have a show coming up at Icon Gallery in Fairfield. Is that right?
I do. Yeah, that's opening actually the week after the fashion show. And they've actually it wasn't intentional, but they've kind of like blended together in my mind because there's such an overlap. So, and I'm going to have a fashion show there too. And so I hope that people from, outside of Fairfield will come and see that show. It will be up until July 12th. So it's up for a little over 2 months. And if you haven't been to Icon in Fairfield, it's a great gallery and a wonderful space. And I'm just really thrilled to be having that show, and especially on the heels of it's just kind of warming everything up to be doing this this fashion show at Cedar Rapids Museum of Art. And also, I think just one point with the before the fashion show, I think people come am I correct that they come at 6 and there are hors d'oeuvres, and so there's a kind of
Yes.
an hour before the fashion show starts, and then so there's sort of like this festive time beforehand, and then
Yeah.
runway show.
Cocktail hour at 6 o'clock, and then the fashion show officially starts at 7. Yeah. Yeah, so we're so excited for that. And this has been wonderful tonight. Thank you so much again, Judy, for doing this for us. This has been really wonderful. And thank you all for joining us tonight. I hope that you have a great rest of your evening, and come back again and check out anything that we have going on at the museum, and our programs as well. Thank you so much. Have a wonderful evening. And thank you again, Judy.
Thank you. It's my pleasure. Bye.
Bye.